Good morning. I'm Cheryl Davila, the founder, chair of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. And we're going to start with the land acknowledgement from Karina Gould, the tribal chair and Confederated Villages of Lejean and co-director of Segurite Land Trust. Karina is a Chochenyo and Karakin Ohlone woman, is a longtime activist who works to protect, preserve, and reclaim ancestral land of the Ohlone peoples. The Ohlone people live in an area now occupied by the greater San Francisco Bay Area, and Karina's tribe specifically is located in the East Bay, and the regions now occupied by Oakland, Berkeley, and beyond. She's the co-founder of the Segurite Land Trust, an urban indigenous women-led trust that facilitates the return of indigenous land to indigenous people. And since last year, I want to congratulate Karina and the Segurite Land Trust for rematriating the Ashby Garden to the Ohlone people. So congratulations on that. And we're hoping the Shell Mound will be another one of those miracles. So Karina, thank you for being here. She's been a champion of the CEMTF for the last 3 years that we've been around, and she's been blessing us with her presence and land acknowledgement for each time. So thank you, Karina. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for always honoring me to be in this space with all of you. It's been a few months, and so I'm so happy that all of us are still continuing to get together. I think that you did a wonderful land acknowledgement, Cheryl, and it's to acknowledge where we're sitting at, the lands that we're on, and who has been here since the beginning of time. But now we share all of this space with all of you, and it is my great blessing to be here on my traditional homelands, to welcome you all to this space this morning, and to kind of just ground us. And I think that's what we'll just do, is we'll ground ourselves in the work that we're doing. And I don't know how many of you were affected by the smoke last night, but there's smoke coming up from over this hill here from some wildfires, I think, that has been going on. And so as this is the work that we're all doing around climate emergency things, then this is a great place to remember that we're in this time of fires right now in California. And so we should just be mindful of each other and the relationship we have with fire. And it's been one that I've been thinking about a lot lately, about what our relationship has been before other people came to this territory to live, and what it is now, and how we view it. And I think we need to come back into right relationship with fire, and to not be afraid, but to figure out how do we work again in tandem with it. My ancestors lived in tandem with fire for thousands of years, and there was a diary that was written by some people that came to visit, and they talked about how the lands were taken care of in such a way that they were more well taken care of than some of the parks in Europe at the time. And to begin to think about how humans have always had their hands on the land in some way, that have been caretaking it, and that's exactly what we're trying to do now. As we all go into this climate disaster, that we're trying to figure out how do we put our hands back in the land that is in a nurturing way, in a way that is living in reciprocity. And so I want to figure that out along with all of you, as we have children and grandchildren that now live in this land. How do we go about taking care of it so that there are fresh waters and good air and good soil for the next 7 generations and beyond? And so I think with that, I'd like to bring that into this space today, as we begin to make big decisions about what we're going to do about sea level rise, and about the fires, and about the land, that we begin to take those in. And so I'd like to take in a deep breath with you guys and send out good thoughts for fresh air for the next 7 generations and beyond. And so we take in a deep breath and let it go. Remembering all those, not just human beings that need good air, but all of our relatives that fly in the sky, all of our relatives that are plants, all of our relatives that live on this planet need good air. And so I want to also take in a good deep breath for our land, what we call Mother Earth, one that holds us up every day, the one that provides nourishment and everything that we need, that we figure out a way to heal her and the things that human beings have done to create harm. And so take in a deep breath and to let it go. And to remember that everything that we eat and that the trees and the plants that give us air and oxygen live on this earth, and that the soil beneath us that we grow food in needs the nutrients that it once had in order to provide us nutrients, and the medicines that help us as we're sick grow on this earth as well. And so they need that soil to grow. I'm going to take in a deep breath for our waters, and our waters that are in the bay, our creeks and our streams, our rivers, our lakes, our oceans, our ponds, all this water, and to remember that all of our water, we cannot be here without it, and that those places need to be cleaned up. And in the Bay Area, amazingly enough, a few hundred years ago, we could drink out of every creek in the bay, and that we could eat food that could sustain us out of the bay. And so let's try to come together and think about what a beautiful way it would be to go back to change it so that we could drink that fresh water again, that we could fish out of that bay again, that we could sustain life here in the bay in that kind of way. And take a deep breath and let it go. And with this last deep breath, I want to invite us all to bring in good thoughts and good healing and take care of whatever it is that we need that's worrying us about ourselves, our family, our work, and to take in this deep breath and to know that we are not alone, that we are doing this work together, and that we are trying to do the work that our ancestors are asking us to do. And we're taking a deep breath. And we let it go. And thank you so much for bringing me into this space today. I hope that you all have a wonderful meeting, and I look forward to seeing you and working with you in the future.
Thank you so much, Karina. And if you didn't know, Berkeley has on their welcome signs, welcome to the city of Berkeley, Ohlone Territory. And now Albany also has its sign on their signs. And Ohlone Territory is now on the Albany signs. And if you're close to Berkeley, you can see the beautiful street mural honoring the Ohlones on Addison Street and Milvia. So, and also on the other side on Alston, there's a Black Lives Matter mural, just the words in the street. And so I want to welcome everyone here. This is our third virtual summit series, Climate, Equity, Race, United Actions for a Just Regenerative Future. This series is called the Ecological Protection. Thank you for being here. I'm the founder of the CEMTF, a former council member in the city of Berkeley. And I want to thank the speakers, Karina, Marcy, Janet, and Andrea, Sarah, Ben, Carol, and Maya. And thank you to the Planning and Logistics Committee folks for organizing all this, Jack, Beth, Karina, Glenn, Ruth, Sarah, and Elaine. And thank you to our fiscal sponsor, the United Nations Association of the East Bay. And thank you, Herb and Larnie. And thank you to the steering committee, past and present, Jack, Elaine, Sarah, Leonard Ruskell, Vice Mayor Eduardo Martinez, Karina, and Deacon Jones. And wave your hands so that folks know who you are if you're here. And sadly, we lost an integral member of the CEMTF steering committee this year, Steve Nadell. So Steve, rest in peace, rest in power. And thank you to our facilitators, Armando, Ruth, and Yusra. And so I'm humbled that this is our third year of existence. Grateful for all of us for volunteering to educate others to understand the importance, urgency, and document the experiences, share ideas, find solutions, support legislation, and get others to support that we are truly in a climate emergency. As Karina just said, there's smoke infiltrating the Bay Area again. All of us spend the bazillion hours on Zoom and meetings, going to actions, rallies, and council meetings and county meetings, demonstrations to protest and let it be known that we are not happy about the multitude of egregious events, sound bites, killings of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people of color, taking away our right to choose, our voting rights, to allow folks to conceal weapons legally, to drill on sacred land, to pollute, to lie, to embrace white supremacy and the hate other human beings. We're witnesses daily. So we have to say no to fascism on Turtle Island, say no to poisoning our air, water, and earth. Enough is enough. We must end this corporate greed, stop extraction, end racism, go green. And I'm not talking about the political party, but to eat more plant-based foods, grow our own, and share with neighbors. Show love and be in solidarity to take away the and unite our planet, humanity, for justice and equity. When I, reflect on my lifetime and see how the disparities and inequities have played out while experiencing all the many forms of racism firsthand and continue to do so, sadly, we see how there are fewer insects, birds, fish, water, yet there's much more weather events, flooding, heat waves, tornadoes, and hurricanes, fire. As I feel the intensity of the sun when I go for a walk, it's blazing hot. And I wear 2 masks, and I know that we have to step outside our comfort zones to make change. So embrace this moment in time, 2022. We have to speak loud, show up, be in solidarity, leave our egos at the door, be true allies in the struggle that we face together, the struggles that we're already facing together, but we are not in solidarity and we are not united. So we have to change all that. Now it's a time to move communities out of the desperate treatments, show positive repair processes, to self-love, empower each other, say hello to each other, reach out to others. And honestly, I feel this is the way that will save our planet and our future. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for those who have made a tax-deductible donation and register for the future summits. And if you can, make a donation. And I'm gonna introduce our next facilitator, who is our son, an amazing, kind, articulate, intelligent man who is a writer, a dancer, a musician, an energy healer, an activist, a teacher, and an incredible human being. I birthed 2 incredible human beings. So I'm a proud mama. So thank you, Armando, for being here to facilitate militarism and climate.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. You're welcome. I just moved to a new place and my internet's a little, I'm using my downstairs neighbor's internet, so I might cut out for a second. I just got it on yesterday, so forgive me. I'm going to run through the schedule. So we're going to have a militarism and climate panel, and then we'll go into petrochemicals, PFAS, plastics and climate. Then we'll go to wildfires in the wild and the city. And then we'll go to united actions that we can all take, and then we'll have some announcements and closing. Each of those sections is about like 15 minutes to a half hour. And there'll be different speakers for each section. So that's what we'll be up to today. And so I'll begin to introduce the first speakers on militarism and climate. And I just want to say, I went to Scotland in November, just as an individual, not as far as the official climate negotiations for COP26. And one of my main takeaways was that, oh, am I freezing? Can you hear me? No, okay. One of my main takeaways was that, the military is enabling this climate crisis because, 1 year of their budget could get most of the transition work done. And the military stands to benefit from the climate crisis because the need for stronger borders will be reinforced as climate breakdown occurs and mass migrations happen. And so instead of standing for planetary security, they're vying for national security at the expense of the permanent viability of our species. And so it's a pretty grotesque situation we're in terms of military will and our ability to address the climate crisis. But that's all I'll say about that. And our first speaker is going to be Marcy Winograd from Code Pink, longtime anti-war activist. Woo-hoo. And a little bit about Marcy Winograd. They're the coordinator of Code Pink Congress and a longtime anti-war activist who served as a 2020 DNC delegate to Bernie Sanders and co-founded the Progressive Caucus of the California Democratic Party. A retired English and government teacher, Marcy blogs about militarism and foreign policy at laprogressive.com. So I'll drop that bio into the chat. And thank you so much for taking the time to educate us, Marcy.
Thank you, Armando, and thank you, Cheryl and Corina and Jack and all of you who are working to build this fantastic organization, the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. Janet and I are so honored to be with you today and to share with you the work that we have been doing to link or to illuminate the deep connection between militarism and the climate crisis. At Code Pink, I am the coordinator of Code Pink Congress. We hold bi-monthly Zooms on foreign policy and militarism and extraction, all of those topics that are linked. We're on recess for a little bit, but we will be resuming when Congress resumes. The reason why we are focused on militarism when we talk about climate is because militarism is a climate threat multiplier. If you can imagine the greenhouse gas emissions that were released just from the war on terror, it's like a 12 million pound of coal. When you think about militarism, you think about the Department of Defense, the Department of War, producing the most greenhouse gas emissions, emitting the most greenhouse gas emissions of any institution in the world. That our greenhouse gas emissions are more than most countries, right? So I say, if we're going to talk about climate, we have to talk about militarism. And it's not just the greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, with the situation in Ukraine being so precarious and this buildup of a new Cold War that I think is even more frightening than the previous one, we have to also address the threat of nuclear proliferation, of a miscalculation or an intended use of nuclear weapons that would impose a nuclear winter on the globe. So I appreciate being here because the times are urgent, as we all know. What we see, however, and Janet's going to go into this more than I, we see silos, right? I agree with what Cheryl was saying about how we have to be in solidarity and we have to connect the dots. So for too long, too many environmental organizations have ignored the threat of militarism and its impact as a threat multiplier. I'm not quite clear why. It may be they feel that there's something they can do about that. But it's really to remain in denial, not to talk about it. And so we want to urge everyone who's working on climate to, in the same breath as we talk about divesting from this extractive economy, that we also talk about divestment from militarism. This is a grave threat right now, particularly as the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, the military budget, heads to the Senate. Some of you may have been following this. The House passed it last night. It passed 329 to 101 votes. 39 Democrats voted no. Barbara Lee was among them. 62 Republicans voted no. Buried in this $840 billion bill are obscene provisions, one of them being prohibiting the Pentagon from spending a dime on humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, where millions are facing starvation as a result of the United States freezing its assets. Another billion was earmarked for Ukraine. There is some provision that the weapons shipments be tracked. Where are they going? Previously, in years past, Congress had said, if we're going to spend money on weapons to Ukraine, and that's been going on for several years, we needed some accountability. We needed to know that they're not going to end up in the hands of the Azov Battalion, a neo-Nazi battalion that has been fighting in the East for many years with Russian separatists. So that's on the table. As Biden heads to Saudi Arabia, I believe he's going there today, there is a push in Congress. The House has a bill introduced by Jayapal and DeFazio to defund the Saudi-led war on Yemen. As it stands now, there is a truce, but it's very tenuous. The United States for several years has been maintaining the Saudi bombers that are devastating Yemen and providing intelligence. So this bill in the House would defund that. There's a joint bill in the Senate that was just introduced yesterday, just in time for President Biden's arrival in Saudi Arabia, where he will not only be begging for oil, but proposing a defense pact with the Saudis. This is in contrast to what he campaigned on the platform, a complete betrayal. So Senator Sanders, Warren, and Leahy have introduced a companion bill in the Senate, and that's SJ Res 56. So one of the asks that I have of you is to ask our senators, wherever we are, our US senators, to co-sponsor SJ Res 56. And I'll put this in the chat, as well as the bill in the House, the Yemen War Powers Resolution, which is HJ Res 87 in the House. Again, I'll put that in the chat. But it's a very important bill because it has to be voted on. It cannot be buried in a committee because it's a resolution. It could be voted on very soon. It has 108 co-sponsors in the House. It was just introduced in the Senate, so now we have to really give it a big push. It's also a big message to the White House that says we reclaim our powers as Congress over congressional war powers instead of just rubber stamping everything. We're right now going to take a look at the Code Pink website, and Janet Wheel, my compatriot, who's very involved with me, but even more so with the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project at Veterans for Peace, is helping out sharing the screen. So I invite you all to join codepink.org. And I wanted to share with you some of our campaigns, one of which is War is Not Green, and we'll get to that in a minute. We also are, but let's take a look at the homepage. Maybe if we could just scroll up a little to the slider. Oh, okay, so this is Code Pink Congress. All right, codepink.org / is it Code Pink Congress or / Congress? I can't recall right now. But here's the slider on the homepage. So we have on our slider some of the main asks. Please assign this one click, or it's a one click, and it sends a message to your House reps to vote against future weapons shipments to Ukraine. I know this is very controversial within the left. There are some who support these weapons shipments, others who say this was provoked by the United States and NATO for many reasons, with NATO expansion up to Russia's neck and installation of missiles, ABM missiles in Romania and Poland, walking away from 3 arms control agreements with Russia. Our position at Code Pink is that there is no military solution. We need a negotiated settlement. And so I urge you to go to codepink.org, click on this, and send this message to your congressperson. Barbara Lee was fabulous yesterday on the floor of the House, speaking against the NDAA, issuing a press release. She has also voted to spend billions of our dollars on sending weapons to Ukraine. And we want her to reconsider as these supplementals are presented to Congress. And we know they will be. They'll be asking for more money. And even in this NDAA, 840 billion, another billion was earmarked for Ukraine, for weapons. So that's one of our asks on the slider. If we click on the arrow, Janet, we can see the next one. Tell members to co-sponsor the Yemen War Powers Resolution, which I just mentioned. And we'll just run through them quickly so you can see what we're up to. We recently held a People's Summit in Los Angeles with representatives from the Global South, talking about the progressive wave that has been sweeping countries like Colombia and Chile in Latin America. We want to see the OAS, the Organization of American States, dissolve because it's basically a puppet of the US, trying to install its own puppet governments and engineer coups. I think there are a few more on the slider. Join Code Pink Congress. Yeah. Starting up in another month or so, it'll be every other Tuesday. And we often co-sponsor these discussions with Massachusetts Peace Action. They focus on all sorts of progressive foreign policy issues and legislation. I know you have a legislative committee, and I would love to work in partnership with you. I'll show you in a minute what we're doing on that front. I also, and it's not here on the screen, but I also wanted to ask you, particularly if you're in the Bay Area, but no matter where you are, to help us promote and broadcast Code Pink Radio. I am one of the producers of Code Pink Radio. I'll send all of this to Cheryl because I know I'm giving a lot of information here. But we produced a 55-minute weekly show once a week, as I said, weekly, that's aired on most of the Pacifica stations and some college stations on Spotify and iTunes. It is not, however, running on KPFA in Berkeley. So we would love for you to help us out with that. Okay, let's take a look at some of our issues and campaigns under the Code Pink website. Here we go. Thank you, Janet. Okay, and if we scroll down, we can see what we're working on. War is not green. That's topical, right? So let's click on that, see what we've got. Let's scroll. And here we just have some facts, some talking points you can use. You know, as I mentioned, the Department of Defense is the single biggest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases. And I try just in my own conversations to avoid, I mean, it is the Department of Defense, but in speaking about militarism and the military, I often say military contracts, military budget, try to get away from the word defense because it is not defense, it's offense. And I also try to avoid the word America in talking about people who live in the United States. I know Janet agrees with me. It almost, you know, it just makes me cringe when I hear that because we know that America represents Latin America, people of the Americas all over, right? So let's not hoard or monopolize that. Okay, if we continue on down, we will see some of the resources that we have and petitions. Okay, war is not green. Let's click on that. Tell us why you stand for. Okay, so if you visit this site, you will, and further down, I think there are also some shareables you can use if you're attending a meeting or a protest. Print one out, take it with you. Let's keep talking about this because, again, we don't want silos. We don't want the environmental movement here and the anti-militarism movement here and the defund the police movement over here. We really have to bring them together, particularly since so much of our military equipment ends up in the hands of our police departments. Not only in this country, but all over the world. It's one of the best kept secrets that the US sends what they call small weapons like assault rifles to right-wing police forces and governments all over the world. And Congress doesn't even know about it because it's simply rubber stamped by the Commerce Department. Okay, so and here we have talking points for social media. If you want any, if you're writing a letter to the editor, war is not green. Let's keep scrolling. If we go back, if we can go back to the War is Not Green page, let's scroll down. I believe there's a candidate pledge. that was added. Take action, keep going. There we go. Say no to campaign contributions from military contractors and the NRA. So this is a Code Pink pledge. You could use it. You could have your own climate emergency mobilization task force pledge that you ask not only congressional candidates or electeds, but lawmakers at all levels to sign that they are going to refuse money from these industries because we don't want to invest in our demise, right? So that's a peek at the Code Pink website. And I do want to say we have a Code Pink liaison program also. We are working to develop liaisons, point people in every congressional district. We have about 75 now. We need a lot more. And the significance of this is that when there is a bill, like the one that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Patrick Leahy just introduced yesterday to defund the Saudi-led war in Yemen, then we ask our Code Pink liaisons, organize a delegation, meet with your House rep. This is supposed to be the people's house. Let's make it the people's house. And they need to hear from us because yes, money talks. There's no denying it. And oftentimes I look at Congress and I say, what is this auction? But by the same token, they care about what constituents think, especially if you're loud. Like Cheryl was saying, we need to be really loud. So those are some of the issues that we're working on as they relate to the War is Not Green campaign at Code Pink. Janet is going to share with you some of the slides in our slideshow for Veterans for Peace, the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, and she'll tell you how you can help out with that. And again, I just want to honor and thank you all for inviting me and for the hard work that you're doing. It requires so much heavy lifting, and I know that. So thank you. And I hope you'll get involved with Code Pink Congress, Code Pink Liaison Program, everything. And much love to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Y'all are very inspiring. It feels impossible sometimes to see the U.S. military divested from. It's a hard imagination to hold. So I appreciate y'all in doing that. All right, so if I may, this is Janet Wheel. And Janet is a newsletter and blog editor for the local Extinction Rebellion group in Portland, Oregon, a very profound group of people. A military family member, she serves on the steering committee of Veterans for Peace, Climate Crisis and Militarism National Project. Thank you for doing that, where her passion is compiling and sharing powerful books, articles, interviews, and videos on the nexus of climate and wars/militarism. Janet's writing has been published on medium.com, wildblog.me. A bird lover, Janet is inspired by the decades-long quest to bring back California condor from the brink of extinction. Thank you so much for being here with us, Janet, and thank you for the education you're going to offer.
Thanks, Armando, and thank you to everybody. I just want to say before I get started with the slideshow that I'm so happy to, in a sense, be back in the Bay Area and specifically in the East Bay. I'm a UC Berkeley graduate, third generation, and lived most of my adult life in the Bay Area. So this is home ground for me. So I will get started with a revised version of, or in a way, my personal version of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project slideshow, which I have tailored for this occasion. So I will begin with breaking silence. We're connecting the crises of climate and militarism, as Marcy has already talked about. And I'm going to start with some critique, but I'm doing this to name it, to change it. The climate movement, especially in the United States, has been largely silent on wars and militarism, as Marcy already mentioned. It's as if US wars, occupations, domestic and overseas military bases, the vast military industrial complex, which includes the UC system, and the enormous appropriations to pay for it all, which next year will exceed $1 trillion simply do not exist. And this silence comes from a movement that prides itself on telling the truth and confronting power. In Naomi Klein's significant book, This Changes Everything, there is one pessimistic paragraph on the US military budget. In the Sunrise Movement book, Winning the Green New Deal, which focuses on federal funding for the climate crisis, not a word deals with how the huge military budget dwarfs the proposed spending on the climate crisis. And of course, we have seen the absolute crushing of the Build Back Better plan. The House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis held one hearing on the military and climate, during which military officers and experts made the case to give the military still more money for their needs. There was nothing about the way the military is adding to this crisis. Bill McKibben has written and spoken a bit about the US military and climate, saying that the military can be part of the solution. In US climate discourse generally, two countries are never even mentioned, Iraq and Afghanistan, let alone that Americans have any responsibility to pay reparations to help those war-battered countries deal with the climate crisis. Also ignored, the greenhouse gas footprint and environmental devastation of uranium mining for new nuclear warheads. Then there's the threat of nuclear winter. This is not how we want to fix global heating. Climate organizations, to my knowledge, have yet to push as a primary goal the Biden administration fulfilling US commitments to the Green Climate Fund to help countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. As James Baldwin famously said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. In order to get to ecological protection and restoration, which Karina spoke so movingly about, we have to have an understanding of how we got to the current ecological reality. So in my remarks today, I'm going to briefly review a few definitions, present an abbreviated version of the Climate Crisis and Militarism slideshow by Veterans for Peace, talk about what we in Veterans for Peace are doing and what we invite you to do and support. I look forward to our discussion afterwards. So here's a little bit about me. On the left, you can see me as a code pinker. For 10 years, when I lived in the Bay Area, I was very involved in code pink, including serving on the national staff for several years. I'm sure you all recognize the bridge that I was on. This was during one of many monthly walks for peace on the Golden Gate Bridge. And on the right, I'm holding up my pizza box sign. And this was in the Fridays for Future Climate Strike, September 2019 in Portland, Oregon, where I now live. I've been active with Extinction Rebellion for almost 3 years. And currently we are pushing our city council to live up to the promises made in the climate emergency declaration that was passed 2 years ago. These two passions of mine have converged in the project I now work on, which is the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. So just to review quickly, we in Veterans for Peace use the term climate crisis for the global changes to the atmosphere because of greenhouse gases. This emphasizes the danger of this situation and the urgent need for us to act on it. And as everybody's probably familiar with the term climate justice, I'll just point you to the text that's on the right there, and also add that climate justice is often linked to the concept of a just transition for workers. and this would include workers in the military-industrial complex, and advocates funding for the most affected people and areas in our country and countries around the world. In the US context, militarism means the bipartisan national policy of military-industrial development, a network of permanent overseas bases, and overt, covert, and proxy wars happening now continually in pursuit of economic and political goals. Military operations are often in the service of corporate profit, such as for the United Fruit Company in Central America, or Exxon and Bechtel, among many others, in Iraq. McDonald's, as seen in the photo on the right, is one of many US corporations that relies on the US military as a huge captured market. Militarism includes the normalizing and glorification of the military in popular culture. For example, the photo of a US soldier giving a toy to Afghan children is one of many such sentimental images in mainstream media. Air shows with jets that burn 9,100 gallons of jet fuel per hour, and the recent film Top Gun: Maverick make exciting entertainment. Year after year, national polls show that the military is the most trusted national institution. And this is despite scandals, failures to achieve military objectives, the high suicide rate of returning combat veterans, and the debacle of retreat from Afghanistan last August. I'm now going to go into as I said, the short version of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project slideshow. So if you want to see the full slideshow, which goes into more depth on these 4 issues, I will encourage you later on to sign up for that. Veterans for Peace, Climate Crisis, and Militarism focuses on these 4 primary areas: reporting and reducing US military emissions, reducing and redirecting the military budget, climate justice, as I've just talked about a bit, and of course, our goals of peace and livable planet, which have been the goals of Veterans for Peace from the beginning. In this presentation, I'm going to focus mostly on emissions. So we in Veterans for Peace see the connections between the climate crisis and militarism, and we've experienced them directly. Our hearts and minds are open to both an American president's warning about militarism and a Swedish girl's warning about the climate crisis. As you probably all know, but just to show one example, the US military is the world's largest institutional consumer of petroleum products, as Marcy already mentioned. And from that, of course, the largest institutional emitter of CO2. The US Air Force uses up to 70% of all fuel consumed by the armed forces. If the US were a country, it would rank at least number 47 among all the countries of the world in emissions. And this is just from calculating emissions from fuel usage, so it would probably be higher. The environmental and climate impacts of war and preparation for war are long lasting. As we can see now every day on the news, the Russian-Ukrainian war is generating massive amounts of toxins and greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that in the photo on the left. War-fighting impacts, as we can see, include fires and damage caused by weapons use, damage to critical infrastructure, which in Ukraine includes damage to nuclear power plants, land degradation, which leads to crop failure, deforestation, debris management and disposal completely falls apart under these conditions. After the war comes post-conflict reconstruction. That generates vast amounts of greenhouse gases, which of course could have been avoided if the war had been prevented. I'll quickly read through some of the worst toxins of war. I know we're going to hear much more about Pfas later on today. One of the most insidious and sinister is depleted uranium, which of course causes cancer and birth defects. We all know about Agent Orange from Vietnam. It continues to cause birth defects in that country. Pfas, which contaminates the water supply in many places in this country. Burn pits, such as you see on the right, they're open air sites of solid waste incineration and have caused tremendous harm both to civilians in countries where the US fights wars and to active troops. And of course, uranium mining and processing and the production of nuclear weapons. Justice for the victims of this contamination and justice for people who live on vast areas of contaminated land is a crucial part of climate justice. I'll give you a moment to read through these two lists of the sources of military greenhouse gas emissions. We cannot just regard tailpipe emissions as the total of all military emissions. The Conflict and Environment Observatory, which studies and reports on military emissions in depth, lays out 4 types of military emissions. Fuel use, which is the most obvious that most people think of. Energy use, which is electricity and heating and cooling for military installations, including military hospitals and huge bases. Supply chains, which generate 4 to 8 times the emissions of military operations. And of course, as I already said, war fighting. For far less than what was spent on wars and militarism since 9/11, the US could have met critical challenges that have gone neglected over the past 20 years. I'm sure we can all think of many other ways to spend our tax dollars, and particularly to spend them in response to the existential threat of climate crisis. I'm not telling you this to make you depressed. We face it so we can change it. So here's a screenshot of the homepage of our website, and if there's time, I'd love to show some of that. And I believe the link to this website will be in the chat. So in addition to what's on our website, here's what we're doing currently. We're giving presentations all around the country. So far, over the past year, we have given 50+ presentations to climate, civic, church, and peace groups, as well as to 20+ VFP chapters. Some of these presentations have been joint activities with a peace group and a climate group. We're tabling at Roger Waters' Pink Floyd National Tour, which is starting soon. That will be dozens of concerts from New York City to Portland, Oregon. Next month, we're presenting a workshop and a plenary at the National Veterans for Peace Convention. And in September, the video recordings of those will be available, and I'll make sure that they get to Cheryl. We're currently organizing the Stop the War, Save the Climate campaign with veterans going to congressional offices. And there may be some NVDA involved in that. As individuals, we work with climate groups, including Citizen Climate Lobby, Climate Reality, 350.org local groups, and as I mentioned, Extinction Rebellion. We're researching, writing about, and compiling resources on the intersection of climate issues and militarism and war. COP27 is coming up soon in Egypt. We're starting to plan actions at the UN in New York City, just preceding the COP. And of course, we will be following what happens in and around COP27 very closely. And as you can see in the photos here, we're hitting the streets in support of climate justice. So what can you do? The first thing is to break the silence about climate militarism, break through the silos. I invite you to host our full slideshow presentation. Please invite us to present to your group or a group that you know of. View, read, and use our materials. Invite veterans to speak at your events. And especially if you live in her district, thank Barbara Lee for her sustained work for peace and environmental sanity over the years. And be in touch with us. Email questions, comments, requests to climate@veteransforpeace.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we just unmute for a second and give some thank yous to our presenters?
Thank you.
Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you, Marcy.
Thank
Great
you.
job.
Thank you, Janet.
Hope you're doing okay, Jack. Yeah, it's, as you know, these are very important topics, and aren't we also grateful that there are people like this working on them? Because yeah, we need the critique about the climate movement not picking up militarism is accurate. These two, we can't have climate justice or a secure climate without the military operations of the United States getting reeled in and repurposed, as was pointed out in some of the slides. So thank you so much to both of you. May you have long health and successful campaigns. May the miraculous, beneficial future that we want, but can see to varying degrees happen for you in your line of work. And that closes our militarism and climate section. So I want to pass it on to the next facilitator, longtime Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force supporter, Ruth. But before I actually do that, I'll just shout out to, if you want to hear a little bit more, I'm one of the co-founders of the Climate Emergency Task Force, and I've moved over to a new organization, which I'll just drop a link in the chat so you can check us out. It's called Earthshot Labs, and we're a startup working to finance large-scale ecological restoration, which is about, thousands and thousands and thousands of hectares getting restored, degraded lands getting conserved through the voluntary carbon market. So I'll drop a link to that. That was a little shameless plug. And then I'll pass it on to you, Ruth.
We're going to move on to a discussion of petrochemicals, PFAS, plastics, and climate. This panel was coordinated with my colleague, Karina Tempeles, who is also here to support, help us address questions in the chat or facilitate our Q&A after the presentations. We invited these really excellent national, international experts to our summit today because of the urgency around PFAS, which is a forever chemical. And we wanted to make sure that everyone understood and appreciated that this is kind of a really impactful issue, and but that there are things that we can do about it. So we want to raise the alarm bells, raise the concerns, but also offer some things that we can do locally to help to mitigate the impacts and to reduce the impacts. So we've assembled a wonderful panel today. Carol Kwiatkowski from the Green Science Policy Institute, Andrea Braswell, Sarah Packer, and Ben Schleifer from the Center of Environmental Health. So while Carol is going to be sharing her slides, I will give you a quick bio of Carol, and then we will, I'll introduce the rest of the panel as they are coming up, and then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So Carol Kokowski is the Senior Associate at the Green Policy Institute and an adjunct assistant professor at North Carolina State University. Carol leads the research projects associated with the Institute's program on the 6 classes of harmful chemicals: PFAS, flame retardants, antimicrobials, bisphenols, and phthalates, and organic solvents, and certain metals. Currently, her main focus is leading the collaborative efforts to address the problems of PFAS pollution and communicating the urgency of removing unnecessary uses of the entire class of PFAS. So welcome, Carol, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm just trying to get my screen organized here. For some reason, it's a little, there we go. Couldn't quite see my notes. Oh, and I've gone to the second slide. So here we are. We'll get started. Thank you very much. This has been such an interesting conference so far, very different from the world that I work in, but so well aligned as well. So I hope you all can shift gears a little bit to talk today about PFAS, which are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're also sometimes referred to as PFCs or fluorochemicals, and they carry the nickname forever chemicals, which I'll explain shortly. So I'm going to kick off this session by describing the basic properties of PFAS, the pollution that they create, and the adverse health effects. I'm also going to discuss how businesses are responding to the problem and how you can help. So it's no exaggeration to say that PFAS are everywhere. They're used in thousands of consumer products, primarily because of their oil and water repellent properties that create stain-proof, waterproof, and non-stick surfaces. Some examples are shown in this slide. They include clothing, cosmetics, outdoor gear, food packaging, firefighting foam, and car seats, and that's just a few. PFAS are also used in industrial applications as lubricants, surfactants, dispersants, and emulsifiers. One study estimated over 200 different uses of PFAS. I'm going to pause for a second, Ruth. I want to make sure that you can hear me okay, because I've got a little message that my internet was unstable. But is everything all right audio-wise?
Yeah, the audio, I think it would be great if you would just go off of video. That might help a little bit.
If I stop video, you'll still
we can still
be able to see my screen?
Yeah, we can see,
okay,
we can still see your
good.
screen, and I think the audio might be a little clearer there.
Okay, great. Let me know if it's still a problem, and I'll see if there's anything else I can do on my end.
I think you're
not that
you're
I know
now.
what I could do, but
Thanks.
Okay, good. So a few brand names that you might recognize are things like Scotchgard, Teflon, and Gore-Tex. And the two most well-known PFAS chemicals are PFOA and PFOS, but there are over 12,000 other PFAS compounds. Within this large class, PFAS have common properties. The one that they all share is persistence. They either do not break down or they break down into other PFAS. And that's because the bond between the carbon and fluorine atoms is human-made and virtually unbreakable under normal environmental conditions. In fact, even when they're incinerated, they don't always get completely destroyed. Many PFAS are also very mobile, meaning they travel long distances in water and air and pollute even the most remote places, such as the Arctic. And many PFAS are toxic to humans or other species, but in truth, we really haven't studied most of them yet. And PFAS can also accumulate or build up in the environment and in people and in wildlife. So if you think about it, if PFAS never go away, that's why they're called forever chemicals, and every day more products are made with PFAS, and they just keep accumulating in the environment and in our bodies. So the best way to tackle the problem is to stop them at their source. There are many routes by which we are exposed to PFAS, including all stages of their life cycle. Production sites are a huge source of exposure. PFAS are emitted through air, wastewater, and sludge that's then spread on agricultural soil that contaminates crops. Drinking water is contaminated from many sources, including production facilities and from companies that use PFAS in their products. And then during the use phase, which includes household use and industrial uses, we are exposed through drinking water, air, house dust, which is a big exposure source for children, and food, especially shellfish and fish, meat, eggs, and milk. And then in the disposal stage of PFAS, because they don't break down, the incineration pollutes the air, the landfills leach, and if they're in recycled products, the PFAS come right back into our homes. The problem of PFAS was brought to national attention by the efforts of attorney Rob Bilott, who uncovered massive PFOA contamination from a DuPont factory in West Virginia that was making fluoropolymers. The film Dark Water, starring Mark Ruffalo, does a beautiful job of telling that story, and I'd highly recommend watching it. And there are, in fact, many hotspots of contamination across the US and around the world. Polluted drinking water is a huge issue. It's estimated that over 200 million people in the US have unacceptable levels of PFAS in their drinking water. I encourage you to check out the Environmental Working Group's PFAS contamination map. The blue dots are where contaminated drinking water has been found. And you can see there are a lot in California on the left there, and specifically around San Francisco. The thing to remember is that areas without dots are often just areas that haven't been measured yet. With PFAS, the more you look, the more you find. Most people at risk for PFAS exposure are those living near chemical and product manufacturing sites, airports, military bases because of their firefighting phones, landfills, wastewater treatment plants, incinerators, and areas where PFAS contaminated sludge is spread as the soil amendment. These are often low-income communities and or communities of color that are already overburdened by other pollutants in their water, air, food, and indoor and outdoor environments. And unfortunately, PFAS have been detected in humans around the world. Over 98% of people in the US have measurable amounts of PFAS in their bodies already. One positive thought is that levels of PFOA and Pfas, those two legacy chemicals, have declined following phase outs of them in chemicals products, which demonstrates that stopping the production of PFAS can actually make a difference. I mentioned that PFAS can be toxic. Here are some of the known health effects. PFAS have been definitively linked to kidney and testicular cancer, elevated cholesterol, liver disease, decreased fertility, thyroid and other hormone problems, and decreased immune response to vaccines in children and adults. And this is really concerning in light of the importance of vaccines today. Several studies have shown interactions between levels of certain PFAS and the coronavirus, including increased susceptibility to the virus, increased severity of symptoms, and mortality. Now, most of what we know about the health hazards comes from research on those two legacy chemicals that were phased out, but we're quickly learning that their replacements are just as bad. So the PFAS Tox database is a website I helped build that shows hundreds of studies of other PFAS and the research on their health effects. So we know that PFAS are bad. And if you don't believe me, you can just listen to the late night TV hosts. Trevor Noah and John Oliver have both done skits on PFAS, which is actually great news. It's rare that the toxic chemicals workspace gets that much attention, and getting PFAS on the big screen reaches millions of viewers. So that was really great to see. So let's shift gears a little bit to talk about what to do about the problem. There are some solutions from the perspective of individuals, businesses, and government. And I'll just say a little bit about government. You're going to hear more about policy later. But the typical regulatory approach to managing chemicals of concern, including PFAS, is to study each chemical individually, or sometimes in small groups, using the process of risk assessment to evaluate toxicity and exposure. But there are currently over 12,000 PFAS on EPA's master list, and some of them have been accumulating in our environment for 80 years since the 1940s. We simply don't have time to study and eliminate PFAS one at a time or even in small groups. So a new approach called the essential uses approach is now taking hold in the EU, China, and other countries, as well as several US states, including California, although not at the US federal level yet. Using this approach, uses of harmful or even potentially harmful chemicals are assessed, and all non-essential uses, for example, PFAS and dental floss, which seems entirely unnecessary, are eliminated as quickly as possible, and only those uses that are essential for health, safety, or the function of society are allowed to continue, and then only until safer alternatives are developed. An example would be a surgical gown that protects medical personnel. You can imagine with all the uses of PFAS that this could quickly begin to turn off the tap of PFAS coming into the environment and our bodies. In addition to some governments, businesses are also adopting this approach, trying to rid their products of harmful chemicals. I'm going to give you some examples. Major carpet manufacturers have phased out PFAS in commercial and residential carpets. Lots of retailers have committed to removing PFAS or have already done so for many of their product lines. And some brands are beginning to label products, which is really great for consumers. I would just caution you to make sure that if you're looking at a label, it says PFAS free, not just PFOA free, because PFOA free means that it is lacking that one chemical, not all of the PFAS chemicals, and we're trying to address the entire class. Large institutions are also addressing PFAS, including places like hospitals and university buildings. And we work with a lot of people in the building industry, including architects, designers, and specifiers who are working to remove PFAS and other harmful chemicals from building materials. One great example of the essential use approach in action is Keen Footwear, who we've worked with for many years. They first made a commitment to eliminate all PFAS from their footwear. Then they began identifying all the sources of PFAS, and they were very surprised to find 101 different uses of PFAS in their shoes. A lot of product manufacturers are similarly unaware that they're selling products with PFAS. Keen was then able to determine relatively quickly that 70 of those uses were not even necessary, so they removed them. Then they focused on evaluating the remaining uses and finding safer substitutes, eventually removing all PFAS from their products. Businesses can often move much more quickly than government agencies to remove harmful chemicals. So it's really encouraging that so many companies today are responding to pressure from their customers for healthier products. And what this means is that the power is in the hands of the consumer, which is you and me. So here are some things that you can do to help get rid of PFAS. Learn about where and how PFAS are used. This summit is a great start. I'll share a few of our websites at the end that have other resources for you. And then once you know more about where PFAS are used, and if you suspect something you're buying could have PFAS in it, ask the retailer, does this have PFAS? Does this have fluorochemicals? They probably won't know, but asking can make a difference. The more people who put pressure up the chain of command, the better. And if you suspect PFAS, you can also ask yourself, is the function necessary? For example, do I really need a waterproof bathing suit? I had to think about that one for a minute, but the answer is no. Is there a safer alternative? Because, for example, they now make non-stick pans without PFAS. And if it's not necessary for health and safety, it's probably not worth the risk, and you can support your family and the environment by avoiding it altogether. Here's some more specific examples of things you can do. Choose furnishings and carpeting without water and stain repellency, including aftermarket sprays that contain Pfas. You can look on labels. When things are labeled, you can look for FLUOR and as part of the chemical name as an indicator that it has fluorine in it. You can purchase waterproof clothing and gear only when you need the function of waterproofing, and not all jackets need to be waterproof. And you can look for PFAS-free options, as I said, using the labels that are starting to come out. You can also avoid buying food that comes in contact with grease-proof packaging. So PFAS are common in microwave popcorn bags, pizza boxes, and other fast food. There are a lot of efforts now from governments and businesses to eliminate these food packaging uses. And I know that it shouldn't be incumbent upon individuals to drive this change. The government clearly needs to step up to address PFAS in a more effective way. But in the meantime, obviously, and you all know this, it's in our best interest to do what we can to protect our health and the health of the planet. So I wanted to end with some resources for you to learn more. If you're interested, we have a website solely for sharing the latest PFAS news, science, and policy called pfascentral.org. We update it weekly. The most popular page is our PFAS free page, where we list companies and the products they sell without PFAS. We have a website called sixclasses.org, where you can watch and share short videos about PFAS and other chemical classes of concern. And our main website, greensciencepolicy.org, has lots of information on the issues we're working on. And I want to close by thanking my colleagues at the Green Science Policy Institute. I think of us as a small nonprofit that packs a big punch, as I believe all of these organizations you're hearing from today are. We do this by conducting research, writing reviews and scientific commentaries, and developing other resources for consumers and businesses. We hold retreats and workshops to collaborate with academic and government scientists, industry leaders, and NGOs. And we have a communications plan that gets lots of attention to the issues we care about. All of this is in an effort to create positive change for a healthier world. And with that, I will end my presentation and we can move on to the next. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Carol. That was perfect. Great introduction, scary, and so we really needed that. We're going to move on and welcome the Andrea and Sarah from the Center for Environmental Health, and they were going to give us a joint presentation connecting some of the issues between petrochemicals, PFAS, and climate. But as you guys come on up and start to share your screen for your slideshow, I will introduce both Andrea and Sarah. So Andrea Braswell is the program manager of the Petrochemicals, Plastics, and Climate program at the Center for Environmental Health, or CEH, as we sometimes call it. She has a BA degree in environmental sustainability from Meredith College in Raleigh, North Carolina, and is also a certified project management professional. She has led efforts to advance equity and diversity in several nonprofit organizations and co-leads the Justice, Equity, and Diversity and Inclusion Committee for CEH. So welcome, Andrea. And we also have Sarah Packer, who is the director of Petrochemicals, Plastics, and Climate project at CEH. And Sarah has a BA in International Studies from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and culinary arts and professional chef certifications from the School of Natural Cookery in Boulder, Colorado. She is also certified in international project management. She's based in North Carolina and is thrilled to be fighting for a cleaner and safer world. So welcome, Andrea and Sarah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. We're just working on our screen share real quick. Can you see our presentation?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Just let us know if we have any sound issues. I have to admit my dog just woke up from his nap, so he may start barking, but we'll try to keep it at bay. So thank you all so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Sarah, and this is my colleague Andrea, and as Ruth mentioned, we'll be tag teaming on this presentation. Andrea and I are, as Ruth mentioned, joining from North Carolina, from the lands of the Occaneechi and Eno. We're based in Durham, and as Carol showed on her slides, you may have noticed that North Carolina has a lot of PFAS contamination. So this is an issue we've been working on for some time, and that's near and dear to our hearts. Andrea and I recently started up a new program at CEH focused on petrochemicals, plastics, and climate. So this presentation focuses on the connections between PFAS and those issues. Some of those relationships are more obvious and some are a bit less direct. And we really appreciate Carol for that great presentation and introduction to PFAS. And we'll go a little deeper into some of those lesser known uses and threats. We're going to start off talking a bit about climate and toxic impacts of PFAS production, and then we'll talk about some of the related PFAS uses and their impacts. And then we'll talk about issues with PFAS disposal, and then share some policy and advocacy tips. Of course, while these topics are all related in a number of ways, The most significant intersection is that communities who are most impacted by one of these issues are also typically disproportionately impacted by the others as well, as industrial facilities are often located in communities of color and low-income communities who obviously face a whole range of other environmental, social, political, and economic injustices. So while taking on these issues can feel overwhelming, it's also important and helpful to see them as part of a system with common underlying causes, and where corporate profits have been put above public health and justice, and where extractive and chemical industries have been allowed to trespass on our human and environmental rights and our bodies. Just building off of the previous session, we too can think of this as a form of violence against us. And really appreciate Cheryl's opening comments about the importance of working together to take these issues on in solidarity and with love. So thank you so much for having us. And I'll turn it over to Andrea. I'm going to try to turn off our camera just in case we have bandwidth issues as well. Actually, I might not do that because I can't get back to the camera.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, all
Okay.
good. Camera ready here. Thanks so much, Sarah, and my fellow panelists, and you all for having us here today. So let's start talking about the climate impacts of PFAS production. I'm going to predominantly be referencing a 2021 report done by Toxic Free Future. And in that report, they found that Daikin America, their Alabama facility, is the only U.S. manufacturer of PFAS chemicals for food packaging. In 2019, these plants reported releasing 240,584 pounds of potent greenhouse gas and ozone depleting chemicals. HCFC-22 is the chemical that was found in this report. And if you can look at this graphic here, those emissions are equivalent to driving 125,000 passenger cars for a year. So, wow. Not in a good way. These emissions make Daikin the nation's #2 polluter of that particular chemical. Here, just on our next slide. Yep. And so that HCFC-22, it damages the Earth's atmosphere in a couple of ways. So it depletes the atmospheric ozone layer, which protects against harmful solar radiation, which causes skin cancer and cataracts. And additionally, as I mentioned, it's a potent greenhouse gas. So its global warming potential is estimated at 5,280 times that of carbon dioxide over a 20-year time horizon. As I mentioned on the previous slide, Daikin is the #2 polluter of HCFC-22, and ChemWars, their Louisville plant, actually ranks as the nation's #1 releaser, and that's with 652,688 pounds as of 2019 released. So in the production of HCFC-22, Daikin's Decatur plant actually releases large quantities of another fluorinated chemical, TFE. Daikin releases approximately 55,000 pounds of this into the air per year. It is carcinogenic and highly flammable and explosive. Actually, in 1999, a tower containing TFE exploded, killing 3 employees and badly burning another Daikin worker in Decatur. So the plant also emits vinyl chloride, which is another carcinogen, and it's associated with liver diseases. And this is a great graphic also from that report that I mentioned from Toxic Free Future. And it really just illustrates the life cycle of PFAS from production to disposal. And all along that process, the air, water, soil, food, the workers, community, consumers, and wildlife are being exposed to this pollution and are being harmed. It's a really great illustration of that. And it would be a remission to not mention the inequities in this exposure. as with other environmental exposures, it's not surprising that African American and other BIPOC communities are the more predominantly exposed. So the U.S. EPA data shows that the community within 3 miles of the Daikin facility that we've been referencing was the majority were African American with an income of lower than $50,000. And I'm going to tag Sarah back in.
Thanks, Andrea. So as Carol mentioned, PFAS chemicals are used in a variety of products and applications, and one of those is actually plastics. And we all know that one of the great myths about plastic is that it imparts hygiene and safety. That might be true in some cases, but we know that in other cases it can be a vehicle for toxic chemicals. We also saw this myth of the safety and hygiene very acutely during the COVID pandemic, where single-use plastic really skyrocketed, even in cases where we knew that there wasn't much of a risk of transmission. Like if you think about how many places maybe prohibited us from using our reusable coffee cups during COVID when there was not much of a risk from using those. But anyway, so there are several different ways that plastics can contain toxic chemicals. Some plastics are what we might call inherently toxic because the polymer itself is hazardous. If you think about expanded styrene, or what we call, most of us know, a styrofoam, it's just sort of a bad all around plastic down to its core. And then there's a whole host of toxic plastic additives. So some of the better known ones being things like BPA or phthalates, but PFAS chemicals are also used as an additive in plastics, and some PFAS additives are actually thousands of times more potent greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide. A recent example where we've seen this is there was a case where the EPA in the state of Massachusetts were investigating a situation where PFAS chemicals were being detected in a pesticide, and the pesticide company claimed that they weren't adding PFAS to their product. And so it turned out that through this investigation, it's suspected that the PFAS in the pesticide was actually coming from the plastic barrels that the pesticides were being stored in. And because plastic is porous, it does, allow substances can go into the plastic, substances can go out of the plastic into the contents of the container. There's a process by which these large plastic barrels are treated with chlorinated gas, and that is meant to create a barrier between the content and the plastic. But this process using fluorine gas, which is a potent greenhouse gas, and that fluorinated gas, while it's not necessarily PFAS in itself, it's suspected that it's creating PFAS through this process. So companies are claiming that they're not using a PFAS chemical, but they may be using a process that then is degrading into PFAS or creating PFAS. This has a wide range of implications. First of all, just that so many different types of products might be stored in these types of barrels and being contaminated. Another is for workers in these facilities that are using this fluorinated gas, they may be being exposed, as well as the local communities and their environment. And then again, the fluorine gas, being a potent greenhouse gas, is maybe being emitted from the facility. So that's one example of how PFAS and plastic, the demand for plastic, may also be driving PFAS exposure. I apologize, I know the slide is a bit busy, but another example is the use of PFAS in manufacturing processes, including things like PVC or vinyl. And PVC is used to make lots of different products, one of those being vinyl flooring, and what we're hearing more and more about luxury vinyl tile, which is very popular these days. You'll see it on HGTV and other programs all the time, but this is a plastic that has a number of toxic implications just across its life cycle. We recently released a report at CEH on the carbon and chemical footprint of PVC, and looking at a facility in China and a facility in Texas. And what we found was that this is creating PVC is incredibly energy intensive. Facilities that use natural gas are emitting carbon dioxide and have other issues. And then in the plant in Western China that we looked at, these are coal-fired plants where that are emitting carbon dioxide, soot, smog, mercury, just creating a lot of climate and health issues. The climate impacts of these materials is typically underestimated. It's not including all of the carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions related to that production. And then it's also produced with PFAS. PFAS, like Carol said, shows up in a lot of places. And we know that it's being used as well as asbestos and mercury to produce PVC. There are other environmental harms associated with PVC, including the release of chlorine gas. And then we're also seeing that these facilities are located in places where protections for workers and the environment are weakest. And then we have this, increased demand for vinyl flooring, which is driving this production. And then, PVC is not recyclable. And if it's burned, it releases dioxins and furans, which are very toxic chemicals. So all around a bad material, but that, gets a lot of attention in the design world these days and is understandably affordable for a lot of people. So it's important to recognize too, how people's options to buy safer products are limited because of wealth disparities. Another use of PFAS is in extractive practices. PFAS is used in fracking and drilling. It's used to ease the flow of oil from the ground. Not all states have to report on their use of PFAS in this way, but there is a report that shows that more than 1,000 wells in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Wyoming were using PFAS in this way. 9 of those were on Chickasaw Nation land in Oklahoma. Just this past June, just last month, Colorado banned PFAS in fracking. And I think, this is one of those really strong examples of let's not find a better chemical for fracking, but let's get rid of fracking and also PFAS in the process. Same with the pesticide barrel example. And then just wanted to raise that, we've seen those old ads about Teflon from the 50s with the frying pan. And, this is sort of the new generation of that is industry greenwashing, where this is an ad from the American Chemistry Council touting the benefits of PFAS for the renewable energy sector. So sort of co-opting that language to promote a dangerous chemical. Luckily, there are groups focusing on safer materials in the renewable energy sector, including the Collaboratory for a Regenerative Economy. It's looking at these, making sure we're not creating new crises while we're addressing others. Just one last hazard. I think I've got 2 more, actually. I'll try to be fast. PFAS can contaminate recycling streams. If you put a container that's had a PFAS containing product in it into your mixed recycling, it ends up, with your in the recycling stream, and we don't know if it could be ending up back up in plastics coming out of that, or just sort of spreading that PFAS along that stream. Another big hazard related to PFAS that's sort of more indirectly related is this new issue around plastic burning. So we know in the world we are generating tons of plastic waste. In the US, only less than 9% is being recycled. And so there's this process that's being promoted by the petrochemical, plastic, and chemical industries that they're calling chemical recycling, but is really essentially plastic incineration. And these are energy intensive processes. There's not really proven success that they do what they claim to do. They call it recycling, and in an effort to keep these processes from being managed as under waste management requirements, including those under the Clean Air Act. And a recent NRDC analysis found that most of these facilities aren't actually recycling any plastic. They're generating hazardous waste and pollution, and they're disproportionately located in communities of color and low-income communities. So really important to keep an eye out for efforts that might be promoting this method. I do want to mention that there was a recent victory in Georgia where a local organization successfully worked to get to prohibit a chemical recycling plant from being built in Macon, Georgia, because they were able to make the case that these facilities don't bring a benefit to the community. I'm going to pass that back to Andrea to talk about disposal.
Thank you, Sarah. So basically, there are currently no safe ways to dispose of PFAS at scale. The current disposal technologies, they don't break down PFAS. As Sarah mentioned, incineration pollutes the air of nearby communities. Landfills leak into ground and surface water. Current sites for disposal, which include incinerators, landfills, deep well injection sites, and farmland where sewage sludge is spread, they're disproportionately located in low wealth and BIPOC communities who, as we've mentioned, bear the burden of exposure from these ineffective disposal practices. And the bottom line is we need to find equitable and effective solutions. So it's essential to develop effective and safe destruction technologies. Incineration of PFAS waste can release toxic air pollutants and greenhouse gases. And there have been multiple petitions to the US EPA that have requested that PFAS be listed as a hazardous waste. Their efforts to use RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, though getting contaminants listed can take several years, and currently hazardous waste is sent to landfills or incinerators, and similar problematic modes like gasification and pyrolysis, which are methods of chemical recycling, or deep well injection. So hazardous waste listing is a key step in getting the EPA to write regulations and hold polluters accountable. And because PFAS are different than other hazardous waste, we need disposal solutions that are tailored specifically to PFAS.
So just for a little fun, we have lawyer Kat with us here today, just to remind us to beware of regrettable substitutions. Ben is going to talk about this, our colleague Ben, in the next presentation, but just important to remember that when we're switching from one problematic material, we don't want to switch to something else that's also problematic. So having that holistic view is really important. And just a few tips around policy and advocacy opportunities. It's always great to advocate for policies that don't just restrict a toxic chemical or specific toxic chemical, but specify safer materials more broadly. So we're not sort of playing that game of whack-a-mole of no PFAS, then no BPA, then no whatever, so that we're really taking a step back and fighting for safer products. Ensure that products containing toxic chemicals are prohibited in recycling programs. Like we said, these toxic additives or ingredients in plastics can get into the recycling stream, and that can be really problematic. Oppose chemical recycling and really all forms of plastic incineration, including sometimes this pops up in recycling policies and programs. So it's important to keep an eye out for that. And then just making sure that our efforts to address climate change and toxic chemicals and safer materials, that we're all working together and making sure that we're focused on the overall picture and not one piece at a time, so we don't end up creating new problems. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ben, I think, or back to Ruth. Thanks so much.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Andrea and Sarah. That was really great. We want to invite Ben up onto the stage, and I will do a little quickie intro. Ben Schleifer is the food program coordinator for the Center of Environmental Health, and he is located here in the Oakland office. There was a question about what kind of activities are going on in the Bay Area with regards to PFAS. Ben has over 6 years of experience working as a science educator in public schools and 4 years of experience working on environmental transformation of school cafeterias, which we'll get to hear about. Ben has degrees in neuroscience, and he uses this background to both understand how to motivate behavior change and also how toxic chemicals can hinder normal childhood development. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Andre. And thank you, Carol. I'm here to talk about solutions because a lot of that information is really heavy, and giving you all that information without something to do about it can be really problematic. So I want to be like solution focused on what we can do about PFAS. And PFAS is very new information. So like let's talk about some of the things we can do. Like we said, the tap is overflowing our bathtub. We could try to bail out the bathtub with a cup, but the real solution is to turn off the tap. And creating awareness is going to be your first step. Like Carol mentioned, we got to get PFAS as a class. We have to demystify this necessity, this need for PFAS. There are a lot of good quality, there's a lot of uses of PFAS, but a lot of them are just like, why? Thinking about banning it at the national level, and then using the environmental health outcomes to push sustainable best practices. So using environmental health as a way to use to combat climate change, I think is a really cool avenue of approach. And so some of the states that have been banning it at the state level, California, Colorado, Safer States has kind of a map of them. They're looking at it in food packaging, carpet and rugs, indoor furniture, children's products, which is disconcerting, ski wax, cosmetic, firefighting foam. Maine and Washington also gave the states big, large authorities to ban it kind of outright in different ways. This is kind of leading us to a nice national push. So we put on the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act amendment. And the amendment is to keep food containers safe from PFAS, amongst other things. This is, June of 2022. So this stuff is kind of fresh off the presses. And again, it's getting national attention. The problem is like the EPA is also looking at it. They have testing strategies, drinking water monitoring and funding to get new laws on the books to the tune of about $1 billion and cleanup. The problem is this is coming about 25 years too late, and it is a start, but they should have started a long time ago, and we need a little bit more dramatic action. So some industries that haven't been mentioned are also pushing PFAS out, and those are the composting industries. BPI, which is Biodegradable Product Institute, no longer takes items with PFAS in them, and the Compost Manufacturing Alliance is also no longer taking items with PFAS in them. And you're like, what items could those be? And we find that some of these molded fiber products that you can find in takeout containers and at restaurants are indeed some of these non-essential have PFAS in the pulp in them. So it's in the product itself. It's not just a coating, it's in there. And it's just a non-essential water and grease resistant for this. And I'm holding up specific types because some of these products, you can tell by just their design where they're intended for use. So these trays with the 5 compartments, if anyone has worked in the school, K through 12 school communities will recognize this is the stuff they use at lunch. You don't usually see these at restaurants outside of the school. And here's a little ask for you during this talk. I put up some trays up on the screen. Which ones do you think contain PFAS? Take a moment. So if you said the top row contains high levels of PFAS, you are indeed correct. Again, BPI and CMA say 100 parts per million is their cutoff. So anything above 100 parts per million is no longer compostable. I think that cutoff's a little generous, but it's a start. And you'll see that World-Centric, Eco Products, and Chinet, also known as Huhtamaki, all have way above that amount for these trays that, again, are intended for the K through 12 schools. And remember that PFAS is an endocrine disrupting chemical, so it's a hormone, and hormone disrupting chemicals in around use are particularly impactful. And so we don't want students eating off of these things. What this slide also indicates is that these companies, World-Centric, Eco Products, and Chinet, have tried to start moving away from PFAS in their products. So World-Centric has an offering, a line that has 17 parts per million when we tested for total fluorine. Eco Products has now joined green screen certified, which I'll talk about in a sec. And China Save a Day has, it's a little bit above the 100 parts per million threshold, but they are looking at reducing PFAS in these disposable, supposedly compostable food trays. Green Screen Certified is something that Center for Environmental Health and Clean Production Action have worked together to put together a certification to look at these disposable foodwares to see, to check for chemicals of concern. Again, we always are trying to push a little bit more towards the reusable, and there will be a reusable certification coming out shortly. But this helps schools and other institutions that can't immediately move to reusables to have a list that has been checked for chemicals of concern and is deemed safe. But CEH's real bias is that this is a very complex problem and it has lots of barriers. When I encounter complex problems with lots of barriers, particularly in the environmental field, I always just try to push more and more upstream. A lot of the folks on this call have eaten off of reusables when they were going through K through 12 schools. So it is a system that has been tested and it does work. Reusables are COVID safe. They're available in safe materials. They have better life cycle impacts. They're much more resilient to supply chain issues because you don't have to keep purchasing them over and over again. They can save money. And the one that I think is most solution impact is they teach good values. I don't know when the last time y'all have been through a K through 12 school, but each student can potentially get one of these a day. And then they use it and then they throw it away. And that is doing it correctly. And some of the students can use it for 20 minutes. Some of them can use them for 20 seconds, just grab the milk and then toss these things. This is a terrible value to be teaching kids at this level. And like I said, one of the solutions is education. We can start at the super young level to say like, hey, this is, your world is not a disposable world, and we should not be promoting things that are disposable when there are other solutions that are also there. And so CEH is diving deep into lots of schools in the Bay Area and across the country on how to transition away from some of these foodwares that, again, have PFAS in them and they're bad for youth. And so we're moving towards reusable. So we set up a toolkit that tells you about all the chemicals of concern, but there's also a planning guide for adults to help them transition schools. There's lots of different touch points, including lessons, including how to hold a stakeholder meeting, how to do a launch assembly around reusables. We're working with a high school intern, Sonali, who's on the call to figure out how to get high school voice in here. And so have a student action plan and planning guide to addendum this toolkit. We have some cost calculators. One of the cost calculators we've been exploring recently is milk dispensing. Those 8-ounce cartons of milk involve a lot of food waste, which is, again, another huge climate change driver, is wasting food, particularly animal-based food. And we've found that using milk dispenser reduces food waste at the school level, and it also saves money. Those milk cartons can come up to 47 cents is the newest price I heard, which is just really, really high for school lunches that used to pay like 20 cents per unit. And so you can see a school of about 750 that's out of Union City that's paying 40 cents for their milk carton can save $10,000 a year just by switching over to milk dispenser. And then they have a reusable that this involves this school had a dish machine, they can wash them. The cost of a dish machine, I'll talk about in just a second, but this also includes the labor piece to wash those dishes. And so like the cost savings can be realized. Every school is different, and but moving towards reusable, something like I say is a little bit more shiny, can be a way for schools to save money during school lunch. So the dish machine in schools, lots of schools, especially on the West Coast, ripped out their dish machines in the 80s. This was due to drought, and they were concerned about water intake. The dish machines currently are very water efficient, so this is no longer a concern. There's a case study of a school down in SoCal, Franklin Elementary, that had Hobart buy them a dish machine, and they moved from 150,000 disposables going, to the landfill a year to much closer to zero. This PTA parent group got super active, and they wanted to get dish machines for the rest of the district. The district didn't have money, so now they have a state bill, SB 1255, that is moving its way through the state Senate with no opposition. That would provide $40,000 per school site to buy and install a dish machine. This wouldn't do all the schools in California, but this would be a huge game changer to putting in dish machines and then getting those reusables in. We also are piloting a new case study in Emeryville, which is right next to me, and they're on Ohlone land. Anna Yates and Emory High are going to be moving towards these nice stainless steel trays. The nutrition service director, Marcia, was going to Costco to buy the foodware because they are competing with everyone across the country for foodware during the supply chain shortage. And she has so much better things to do, like making, nutritious and delicious meals for students. She's over it. So we're turning on their dish machine, and we are going to get them some reusables fall 2022. And there will be a press conference, so keep aware of that. And we will be talking about toxics and how, reusables is just more environmentally friendly during that press conference. We have a nonprofit that will buy you these nice stainless steel trays. They'll spend $5 per unit to replace single-use plastic. They're called plastic-free restaurants. They're looking for more schools to play with, which is amazing. Yes, can't not mention Austin Independent School District. This is the shining beacon of sustainability schools. They serve over 75,000 students at the elementary, middle, and high school level. We're talking like 13 million meals. And again, 50% of their schools are zero waste. They have reusable serviceware. They have bulk milk, minimal packaging, family style dining. They kind of just elevated the school lunch experience. The students love it. The staff love it. And the director or the executive chef, Diane Gruduk, her advice to anyone who's looking to start this at the nutrition level is start small. And she also says that it's important to value, labor over buying something just to throw it away and then paying to throw it away. This is one of the main barriers we're running up against, is that the labor issue. You can't have sustainable lunch rooms without having the sustainable nutrition staff. And a lot of the lunch folk who are working in our K through 12 schools are part-time workers, have multiple jobs just to make ends meet, had to work through the pandemic. And it is very important to uplift their work because they are doing, what I would call really holy work, which is keeping people fed. And I think that's an important work. So some actions you can do, again, like a call to actions are always hard, but like I usually split them into stuff you can do as an individual and stuff that is more collective. Getting education out there. Again, I had the opportunity to take Carol's NRDC fact sheet to a sophomore high school and do a kind of a scientific debate between a paper the industry put out and the fact sheet, and it was very robust. The students had never heard of Pfas, which was just kind of resounding, like they hadn't heard about it, and they were like debating on like, oh, Pfas are important for cell phones and flight, but it's toxic. But as soon as I showed them their foodware also had Pfas in it, they were like, we need to get rid of this out of our school immediately. So bringing in that education component, and you can start young, I think is very important. Remember your purchasing power. If you're buying something that is single-use disposable, try to avoid doing that. You can ask your government officials. Again, I used to work for a waste company, so looking at the waste end is a good way to approach it. And always push for those upstream solutions. If you're finding barriers, just move on upstream, just like the salmon moving upstream. Some collective action. So let me see if I can connect some of the dots for these solutions. Code Pink talked about the military bases, and they are using firefighting foam, particularly on their landing strips. Part of the reason that the military industrial complex is so robust and hard to tackle is because it's everywhere in this country, including in a lot of points in rural USA, my bad. And so they are putting this toxic chemical on their landing strips to fight fires that aren't really there. They're doing practice firefighting, and they should be required to be good neighbors, like, because they're contaminating the water. So we should flip that script and take some of that $840 billion and spend it on the cleanup of this country rather than worried about other countries. We're going to be talking about California fires as well in this panel. And the firefighting that is done for the wildfires, they don't use PFAS, thank God, on the forest, but the gear the firefighters are wearing is also laden with PFAS. And this is why you might be seeing that a lot of firefighters have worse health outcomes, even though they're a community that is a very fit community because they have to be. Also, the fires that are being fought in California are being fought by prison labor, getting paid like $1 a day, and they're using gear that is bad for their health. We need to be touching on this point, particularly of the folks who oppose us talk about blue lives and red lives matter. We could say, yes, we care deeply about firefighters. We need them to be using gear like jackets that don't have these toxic chemicals that give them cancer in it. Talking about apparel stores, like writing the REI and saying like, hey, you have a policy of no trace. When I take my rain jacket out into the backcountry, I am leaving PFAS as a trace. This topic is something that I found has resonated with high schoolers, which is really cool. There's usually in the environmental field, it's hard to kind of get the high schoolers really up in arms about it. But when you say that the foodware that they're eating off of every day curates toxics and it's bad for the environment, they can rally around that, which I think is really important. And lastly, uplifting care workers is also important. So talking to the nutrition staff, saying they have a lot to deal with, and this is another thing they have to deal with, but we don't want them to be exposed to this stuff every day, because again, they're putting food in here, and when the food, they're getting exposed to it as well. So those are some of the collective actions and solutions that I like to propose when talking about PFAS. Keep it positive and kind of keep it moving towards better and upstream solutions. So that is my talk.
So now we're going to, we have a few minutes now to answer some of the questions. We're going to read a couple from the chat, and then also if you would like to raise your hand and ask to be unmuted, you can also ask a question of our panelists. So the one question I think for Carol came in, which was, is there PFAS in municipal water supply? And another question that came up later was, does all vinyl flooring have PFAS? Do you know the answers to those questions, Carol?
Yes, there's PFAS in the municipal water supply. You can go to the Environmental Working Group's website, and you can put in, I think, your zip code and find out if there's been testing in your area, which I think there has been a lot around the Bay Area, and you can find out very specifically. Hopefully, I mean, not every location is there, but there's a lot. So that's a really helpful place to use. And then the other one was, is that about the
does all vinyl flooring have waterproofing? PFAS?
Oh, a vinyl flooring, FLOORANG. Answer that.
You might be breaking up
more
a little,
accurately.
Or maybe it's me.
I'm happy to take that one.
Okay.
Not all vinyl flooring is made with PFAS. The vinyl flooring that we studied when we looked at two plants, the plant that we looked at in Texas, the vinyl being made in that plant is actually made with asbestos. In the process, PFAS is actually the replacement technology for asbestos. It's considered the safer option. And so at the two plants that we looked at, one in Western China and one in Texas, the Texas plant was using the asbestos technology, and the plant in China, it's called the Yibin plant, was using the PFAS technology. So if you go into a big box store and are looking for vinyl flooring, there's not going to be PFAS in the vinyl flooring. It's used in the manufacturing of it. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, that if you have vinyl flooring in your house already, or in your office or wherever, it doesn't really pose a risk during the use phase. So don't worry that your vinyl flooring that's already, I went to physical therapy this morning. It was all vinyl flooring. We're all around vinyl flooring regularly. that's not really a risk. It's more the production process and then the disposal process. And you're not necessarily going to know if the vinyl you're purchasing was produced using the PFAS, or using asbestos. So it could be either, depending on what factory it's coming from and what technology they use. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
I think the advice is either way, don't buy another vinyl floor.
Yeah.
Don't
And there's all
contribute to
those
that manufacturing solution. Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you talk about PVC piping really quick too? Because that came up in the chat.
Yeah, please do.
Sure. Yeah. PVC piping is going to have a lot of the same other issues as any PVC. PVC is the polymer. So whether it's piping, whether it's flooring, whether it is faux leather, which sometimes it's polyurethane, but sometimes it's PVC. And PVC is used in a lot of things. So it's also used in labels on some bottles, like a drink bottle. Sometimes we'll have a flexible PVC label on them. So any PVC product is going to have harmful impacts on the environment and on human health. The polymer itself is just not a good, safe product. Some of those, as I mentioned, some are made using a Pfas process, and some of them are made using asbestos, and also mercury is used in their production. And then if that, as I mentioned, if that PVC, whether it's a pipe or a flooring product, if it burns in a wildfire or house fire, it's going to release toxic chemicals. So all around, not a great option. I see there's a question, does linoleum have PFAS? No, linoleum is actually a great flooring option if you're willing to, if you're willing to get linoleum. It's, some people say, it's not your grandma's linoleum. They're making new forms of linoleum now that have a different look. That's a great option. It's made from linseed oil. We have on our website, if you go to ceh.org/flooring, we have a lot of resources on safer flooring options. Linoleum, hardwood, ceramic tile, all good options, all more expensive arguably than PVC. So again, that affordability issue, access issue is important to remember, and also remembering where those costs get externalized. I wanted to mention, and I forgot, that there's also a recent study that came out on forced labor in PVC manufacturing facilities in Xinjiang region, which is the Uyghur region in China. And that's a huge thing that we should all be thinking about, is that, these products, part of the reason they're cheap is that they're being made through forced labor, and that, human rights offenses, abuses. And we should, that should not even be something that we're allowed to purchase. So, that's really important to keep in mind, is why are these products so cheap? Partly because they're being made basically through modern day slavery.
I see we're getting, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, to answer Philip's question above that, is PFAS better than asbestos? Because this comes up a lot. Is PFAS better than styrofoam? We just say that is not the right question, because they're both really bad. And this is when I say this is the time to think about moving upstream. If you have to ask, is something better? That's not really where we're at. We're not going to be choosing which of our devils is we prefer. We're just going to say flat out no. And so I think the same thing with PFAS and asbestos. Both are bad. There are better solutions out there.
Thank you so much, you guys. This was a really eye-opening panel. We're at the top of the hour now, so I think we're going to move on. But if you have a bit of time to stick around and answer a couple more questions in the chat, that would be awesome. Otherwise, thank you so much. Everyone will be getting the information out to you. Copies of the slides are available. And of course, we will have recorded this session, and we'll be able to provide that as well. We'll turn it back over to you, Cheryl.
Hi, thank you. So I had a question, because back in the 70s, when I used to get this delicious lemonade, not lemonade, iced tea in a styrofoam cup that had lemon, and they said lemon breaks down the styrofoam. So, and then I stopped doing that. But I was curious, does that still apply to like stuff that has PFAS in it? If you put lemon juice on these things, are you going to get more chemicals than if you didn't? That was just a curious question. You can answer it in the chat if you so desire, because I was just curious about that. If we're putting things into these containers, can it break down while we're using it? Which I'm not using them, but just for anybody else that could be, and we need to stop using all these things. So, okay, next we have up Yusra.
Awesome. Good afternoon or good morning. We're almost there to the end of the next CEMTF summit. My name is Yusra, and I'm currently a rising senior at UC Berkeley. And I want to thank Cheryl, especially, and the whole CEMTF group for hosting, once again, another summit on such an amazing scale for this year as well. Sarah and Andrea, Ben, and Carol, thank you so much for presenting that fascinating research about issues that are really pertinent to the most vulnerable in our society, the kids, and the rest of us as well. Today, I'm really excited to kind of introduce the next topic, which will be about the wildfires that really impact our environment. And I'm not sure how many of us maybe were in Oakland this past week, but there was actually a fire over the I-880 that basically originated from a homeless encampment under the highway. We might have seen it as we were driving, but we couldn't help but think about the 1991 fire in Oakland and just thinking about the environmental hazards that this can have, that we're just now really getting the technology and the resources to learn a lot more about. And all of us are really lucky to have Maya here today morning to talk to us about that. Maya Kosla is a wildfire biologist. She's a writer and a filmmaker. She produced a film called Searching for Gold Spot, The Wild After Wildfire, which I'll be sure to give it a watch if I can. And it's about the high biodiversity of natural forests that have recently experienced really large wildfires. She has done incredible work that's taken her across Kenya, across the United States, and she has all of these incredible this research that she can share with us today. So Maya, I'm really excited to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Just thumbs up.
Perfect.
Okay,
yes.
Great, great. Before I jump into the slides, there's just so many things about wildfires. I'm mostly a wildlife biologist, but I've also been a biologist working on plant regeneration after fire, looking closely at all those little buds and seeds and flowers and little seedlings of big trees, like baby giant sequoias that are all over the forest after the wildfire. People don't see them because they're just an inch high or 2 inches high. You pass them by, but they're there, and they are tomorrow's, they're the younger generation's forests coming up. If we could just keep them right where they are and encourage them to keep going. After wildfire, a lot of this happens. And so I'm here to share some of the sort of the little secrets, some of the good secrets, some of the bad secrets, and some of the not so great secrets that, like very, very hidden secrets that you may miss very easily if you're not out there. So I've got quick some slides to share. I think because we had a 5-minute break, I think I have 15, so I'm going to try and stay within it and race to the finishing line. So be there for questions, and let me try sharing the screen right now, and I'll come back. I don't like to share the screen for the entire time, so I'll come back hopefully on time to share a few little concluding thoughts. Can someone tell me if you can see a screen with a bluebird on it? Little mom bluebird. Okay, actually,
yes,
this is a dad bluebird feeding chick. And the reason I'm starting with this one is because a lot of people are thinking that the cavity is actually a dead tree, right? The dead trees are the homes, they are the housing developments for the wildlife. It's just amazing. And this is not just for birds, it's for a lot of wildlife. So the fact that we're trying to say, oh, these are going to burn, let's remove them, is probably a mistake because we're actually removing the housing complexes. Not only do birds rely on them, and this is a very rare animal, the Pacific fisher. It's endangered in the southern part of California. And they also, he's just got, he or she, I think might be actually a she, young fisher just got digging in that log in front of her. And so, yeah, they use the standing dead trees. They use the lying down logs that are recycling into the forest floor. So quails standing on another snag. The bobcat was doing a little massage for himself, and this is a nice big adult bobcat on a fallen log. Below that, you can see a little bit of the little regen I was talking about, all these little furs growing up. Sometimes you just don't know where to step on the forest floor, and you can see behind that the big old snag that's a sign of the fire. It's all charcoaled. So this bear is also scrounging around it's a black bear. I know, it looks brown. Scrounging around in the snag forest. So a lot of these beautiful secrets of the snag forest that, we won't see. Actually, I wouldn't see if I didn't have remote cameras out there. This one I did see. It's a blackback woodpecker, very rare. Picking out his favorite food, his favorite not so fast food out of the snag, which is a wood boring beetle larva. It's glowing white over there. And great gray owl, and very much endangered in California. And that picture sort of illustrates itself, because look where she's standing. That's a mom, and the baby's calling over to the north. And so I heard her and the baby and jumped out of the car in one of the post-fire forests. As you can see, all this beautiful growth. What's happening now, this is the secret. That's what's happening, and what we're missing is that, it happens really quickly. It's right after the fire and right before the clear cuts. A few seasons is all we get to glimpse all this stuff. And you can see on the roadsides how many live things are being taken out. So it's all the guys of like, good, let's get it out, otherwise there'll be another fire. Well, that's not really related. This is clear cutting that's done. As you can see, these are all live redwoods. Redwoods are the king of coming back after fire. So yeah, they're not, and some of the fires are really related to, I'm taking you jumping around from idea to idea as fast as I can. Some of the woods are burned with high severity. You can see that behind. By high severity, I mean a lot of the trees, or most or all of the trees, are standing dead snags, and they're all spindly. And the contrast between them and what's in front of me in that photo, and my colleague in that photo, is the fact that the biggest trees have been taken out as part of thinning activities. That's sort of not what we want to see. We want to see the biggest trees left in, and maybe some of the small trees taken out if someone really does want to do a thinning operation. This is the opposite of what's happening. And then, of course, the slash piles are either burned in place, which is, by the way, called prescribed burning, very different from Native American traditional burning practices. And by the way, Native Indian, I'm East Indian, so originally. So East Indian, far Northeast, we also practice cultural burning, and they have these yearly burns. Very different, these traditional burns, from a prescribed fire that's sort of slash piles going off into smoke and total silent areas left behind. This is not something you see. You almost always miss this. It's going to be right after the slash burns, or maybe a few years after, when the grass is growing a little bit. They take Roundup and spray it in. You can see, I heard and I knew, I documented this. These people left very quickly after I documented it earlier this year. Roundup spraying on the forest floor. You can see lack of protection in the workers, no hand protection, no face protection right there. Jumping over to some of the things that happen that cause sort of high severity fire, which is the thinning that I showed in that photo with the big tree removed and me in the background. with a friend, is that once that's done, some of these areas that are the very areas that were thinned to stop or slow down the fires are the ones that burn exactly the opposite way, fast and with high severity. So I'm going to go back to the good news real quick, because that's what I'm supposed to focus on here. And I'm just going to, hold on, I just want to make sure I'm not too far on my time. Okay, yeah. You see the great gray owls, these are chicks, and you can see in the background that their home, where they were born and raised, is beautiful burned cedar snag. Blackback woodpecker feeding its little chick, who's popping in and out of the nest, very excited to be fed. That chick's going to grow up and fly in a couple of days, and did that. It was fine. White-headed woodpecker, northern flicker. These are the builders. These are the carpenters, nuthatch, and then the western bluebirds and others end up using those snags. That's a mountain bluebird, getting very territorial because I'm a little close to the nest. I had to back off. And then there's so many others who benefit from, you know, that's, by the way, a California spotted owl that are, you know, these cuts are really affecting all the animals. And I've just been out there documenting northern goshawk. By the way, this is 3 chicks successfully fledged from this mom goshawk's nest. They were fighting a little bit, but she was feeding them very regularly, and chicks do battle back and forth with each other. That's the chicks. And I'm this is a shot taken from Sonoma County. We're no exceptions. We had the Walbridge fire in 2020, and right after the Walbridge fire, this is from a friend's land. She asked me to put some remote cameras in, and this is a baby bobcat. And we had baby foxes, by the way, also. I don't have a photo of them. A neighbor of this person had her cameras out, and the baby foxes were playing football with apples from her orchard. So a very productive space after wildfire, including this big old mountain lion. That's a night shot. Deer coming back. These are all post-fire areas. In the back behind the deer, you can see that snag. And then this little ringtail cat, not very common at all, on a fallen snag on a log, sort of foraging at night. You almost never see ringtails in the daytime. So all that's a weasel and a pair of foxes also. So you can see them using they're using the fallen snags as trails, as massage points, as, you know, viewpoints, investigations while they're trotting around and pursuing their lives. And, you know, the minute the clear cut happens, everything sort of goes to a blank silence. So that's one of the things. It's not really helping them. It's not really helping us actually stop fires. And we can see a lot of clear cuts and a lot of fires after that. So it's really not helping. And another bobcat, that's an adult bobcat there in the snow. Baby bear in the spring. So I'm gonna skim through this baby and mom bear. I got footage of it, both of them foraging on this fallen log. And I think I'm gonna just stop right there with that idea I'm gonna stop, oops. See if I can do this. I don't know how to stop the screen share. Did I stop the screen share already?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Good, because I didn't want to be too late. So, okay, main ideas, quick take home. Sorry, I was trying to whip through that as fast as possible. I think that I've been paying close attention to your beautiful and brilliant presentations, all of you, and some of them very dark news for all of us. And I'm thinking my outreach point to you all is, how can we dovetail our efforts? Because everything is happening very quickly at the same time. So a question for Code Pink, for CEH, CEMTF, who thank you for bringing all this together. That would be my first question, is that if we're looking at something that's unhealthy, like say, for example, the firefighting efforts and then the aerial efforts that, of course, are poisoning animals as well as us because we got the PFAS coming down. how do we create awareness, at all levels, that this is happening, clear cutting is happening. And by the way, backfires, which are part of wildfires, are not talked about and not investigated at all. Backfires are where they actually start deliberately burning, hopefully for fire to meet fire and stop it, but does it always do that? No, it doesn't. So so the question is, how can we productively outreach together? And I think that that's something, if we can just think about it just for a little bit, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. But really, all of your ideas are giving me ideas about the fact that we can really pull together some of our resources to, to educate everybody, each other, and move forward with, sort of more outreach. All right, thanks so much. And I'm happy to share. I have a million more slides and films and such, and I'll share them with links and such. Questions?
Thank you so much, Maya. That was a truly, truly insightful presentation. And as she said herself, she has a lot, just the breadth of information and research that you've done over the years is, we could spend a whole other hour on it. So we do have a couple minutes as well for questions, and we'd love to maybe welcome at least one question, and then maybe near the end of the presentation, after we hear from Catherine as well, we can have a couple of other questions as well. So one of the questions that did come in through the chat is about the snag destruction. So Jan is asking, how can we stop this despicable process of snag destruction? The Cal Fire seems to be a pretty a big roadblock in this. So maybe you might have some insight into that.
Yeah, I think there's 4 or 5 different things we can do. One of the things that is missing is, when they call for snag destruction in the name of protecting us, how far away is that from any home and community? Number one, is it really going to affect us if it's going to be a few miles away? Probably not. And then the other thing about it is that, what are the previous data telling us about the fact that areas where snag is destroyed, when they reburn, they actually reburn worse? Or do they really reburn better? Does it stop a fire? Most likely it doesn't. So it's all that destruction that's actually going into biomass production, which connects very deeply to what CEH is doing, because this biomass-related emissions, including all these carcinogenic compounds that are coming out, and these biomass facilities are popping up all over California right now. California is marketing in a major way to call biomass energy renewable. So first step, let's stop calling biomass energy renewable, burning trees, burning snags, burning the housing complexes and paths and trails for wildlife, etc., and all the carbon for the soil. Burning that up is for us to breathe is not the answer, and it's not going to help with wildfires. So I have like 4 or 5 ideas of how that could be, the outreach can be done. And yeah, really public outreach is the best, right to the newspapers. This really is nonsense. There really are spreading a lot of false news about this being the cure-all for fires. This is for your good. This is for your, for stopping fires, for your safety. You just have to ask some questions. And there's some people who are at the forefront of trying to answer those questions, but really it is mapping and really looking at those fires, getting out there and seeing if the fire of your choice, if it's Caldor because it's nearby and it's Tahoe, if it's Dixie because it's Lassen and you like Lassen, it doesn't matter which one you go to. It's like a few months after the fire, going out, taking photos, getting onto the ground, and that would be just a big favor to everybody. And then sort of posting whatever you find.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya. I'm excited to transition and introduce Catherine. Kat Ramos is currently the managing director at the Richmond Hour Power Coalition. And here she does a lot of work with creating a lot of plans to support coalition organizations with funding resources. And as she's also a core member of the Newark Water Coalition, as well as the Urban Cooperative Enterprise Legal Center, a lot of her work entails conducting and facilitating educational sessions on different alternatives to economic models and cooperatives, especially during COVID. And also how to better coordinate water distribution throughout our communities here in the Bay. So I'm really excited to give it over to Catherine. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, is it okay for me to jump in? All right, awesome. Yeah. Yes, I appreciate all those images and everything you shared, Maya. I am, as Yusra said, I am Kat Ramos. I am the Managing Director of Virgin Our Power Coalition. Yeah, I can talk about a lot of different things. I think there have been a lot of really wonderful presentations and ideas brought forth. And I love that I'm following Maya because I think I want to kind of gather it all into a centering that many of us, I think about peripherally, but maybe not as intentionally as we could be. And so that's what I want to kind of bring into the space with us. I have some slides to share, so I'll start there. So this is a aerial shot of Richmond, and you can see that our coalition consists of these 9 different organizations and hopefully growing soon. They're all community-based organizations. Many of our organizations are focused on combating the harm that exists in our community. We have a refinery Chevron right in our backyards. We do have to deal with wildfires and a lot of environmental racist, policies and different things that have made our community very, very difficult to live in and exist in any kind of peace. And so a lot of our organizations kind of stemmed into a small coalition in 2012 after the fire, the Chevron explosion and fire in 2012. We're coming up on 10 years of that anniversary right now. And over the course of this last decade, we've come together to formulate not just a response to the issues that we're facing in terms of environmental racism, but also the alternative systems that we need to have exist in order for us to thrive and live together. So that's a lot of the focus of our coalition. And I want to talk about how we do it. So let's see if this works. There we go. So I like to ground this in this statement because to me, it's at the foundation and at the core of everything that we do. The just transition model is what we use as our model in order for us to bring the programming and the projects forward for our community. And so we like to center everything that we do in love and care in order for us to bring justice forward for our community. And so that's why justice is what love looks like in public is one of the statements that I constantly bring us back to by Dr. Cornel West. How do we do it? How do we transition away from the system that exists and towards the systems that will allow us to thrive and live together? And it really stems from us reclaiming and restating and redefining what our ecosystem actually is. In the system that exists, economy and ecosystem means something very different and very far away from what it actually is meant to be. And so when we are talking about the programming, the projects that we're doing, the community visioning that we're having, it's really about us redefining for ourselves what the relationships are that we have to each other and the land that we're a part of. And so an ecosystem actually means all of the relationships in a home. It's really about us figuring out and understanding what those interwoven relationships do, what capacities they're at, and how everything can be generative in that process. And the economy means something completely different in the system that exists now, but in its truest form, it's really about the management of our home. And so how are we organizing our relationships in place so that we can take care of the place and each other? And our entire process in our coalition is really about these relationships. And so when we're working together, when we're trying to create different things together, when we're really envisioning a different future together, it's really at core what this is, you know, really reimagining and revisioning what our ecosystem can be, what it looks like now, and how we get there. And again, if we're going to be grounded in these, you know, we can talk about all of the different policies. We can talk about all of the different things that are happening to us. We can talk about all the different campaigns that we can, you know, come up with, and the different strategies that we can come up with. But we have to ground them in something. And we have to ground them in removing the harm that has been done. We have to ground them in moving us towards healing. And we also have to ground them in the genius that our elders and our ancestors have held. In something that Maya mentioned about the fire burning. There are very different practices that have happened, you know, from our ancestral practices or elders that have practiced different things that actually bring harmony back to the land. And so we want to incorporate that in our process. And so what if we defunded and dismantle and abolish the systems that cause us harm? What if we actually reinvested resources in our communities to build cooperative, caring, connected, community-controlled institutions that provide for our needs? And that's really at the core of everything that we try to bring forward, and what I really want to try to help other people to think about. When we're pushing campaigns forward, when we're thinking about solutions, we really need to think about the relationships that we're creating, the relationships that already exist, and how we transition them from extractive to regenerative. And so just a very simple definition of what just transition can look like, you know, in a very simple explanation is all the ways that we as community vision together, decide and implement how we collectively care for and manage our home. And that is the simplest way for me to describe the model that we use, which can be very complex if you look at you know, all the ways that it's been described. And so our coalition really takes on the role, one of the roles that we take on is to help in the process of shifting away from this harm that exists in the systems as they are, and towards this creation of balance, reciprocity, and care by creating alternative structures. So within our coalition, we have a community land trust. Within our coalition, we have a cooperative enterprise incubator. Within our coalition, we have a 3-acre farm and expanding, hopefully, which gives hundreds of families within Richmond access to organic, clean, healthy, whole foods for free in many cases and at very low costs otherwise. And so all of those things are responses to, in addition to how we really push for policy change, really push for the protection of tenants, of our community, our unhoused, in a lot of different ways as we're building these different systems. And this is just a screenshot of what our core is what is at the core of our regenerative economy. At the center, it's cooperation. At the top, in terms of a worldview, it's really about caring and sacredness. And when I was looking at Maya's images, it really brought me to that principle of caring and sacredness. When you're thinking about children, they are sacred. And you know, we need to protect the environment, and they're part of that environment, and they are the future of this environment. So we need to be able to create the kind of economy, the kind of home, the kind of ecosystem where they can thrive. And that's what we're really looking towards with this kind of model and this kind of structure. And that leads me to this, which I think is the most important aspect of anything that I can talk to you about today. And it's really us examining and reflecting on these main three things that I like to bring up in conversation. What are the ways that we are contributing to the harm of our most marginalized and impacted? And I think that when we can examine and reflect on that, whether it's in our organizations, in the relationships to our neighbors, to the environment, to the parks, to the forests, to everything that we're a part of, what are the ways where we're still contributing to that? And it really goes back again to these relationships. Another thing that we try to bring up and examine and try to talk about is, how are we pushing back on the conditions that exist within these systems in order to remove the obstacles that our community is facing? And that's a big one, because there are a lot of different groups that want to work within the system, and there's a limit to that. There are a lot of different groups that want to work completely outside of the system, and there's a limit to that. And I think that in order for us to really look at this in its entirety and really bring forth change and a real transition, it's about all of the different relationships at macro and micro level that really are pushing back on these conditions in every way, every possible way that we can think of. And then lastly, is really thinking about how am I going to help unearth and remove these colonial patriarchal indoctrinations in order for us to heal. Our coalition has a lot of work to do. We've been doing a lot of work, and the work can't be done if we in ourselves are indoctrinated with these different, very extractive and harmful things that don't allow us to build these relationships with each other. And that is really at the core and the crux of everything that I ever want to bring forward in any space. When we're talking about environmental justice, when we're talking about all of this, it's the relationships. It's really those relationships, making them as non-extractive as possible, removing any kind of power dynamics, removing the manipulation, the indoctrination of the things that harm us. And so in everything that we move forward in any campaign that we move forward in, any project, really thinking about those relationships. And I hope that I can leave you with that, and just having us think about how we can contribute and how we can make that better, so that when these things do come to the forefront, when we have to fight, we already have that foundation of relationship with each other. It makes so much of a difference when we fight together and we have that foundation. So that is all that I have to say. I hope that I didn't take up too much time, but I do appreciate being here in community with you and sharing that information. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. That was impactful. And I one of the things that really stood out that I think it's so great that we ended this particular series on your words of regeneration and not extraction. And that's really at the crux of these relationships that we have with each other and with the environment. So thank you so much to all of our speakers today. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to drop them here in the chat. Maya also provided wonderful resources and videos that can educate us about the topics that were presented. So we hopefully will compile these and send them out to all of you for your reference afterwards. But if there are other questions that come trickling in, that's great. But Cheryl, I can hand it back to you.
Wow, that was just such an amazing, and it's such an amazing morning, because that's what we really have to do, is unite and be in solidarity and get our communications and going stronger, leave those egos at the door or down the block, around the corner in another state, and just work hard, because we got a lot of work ahead of us, right? I keep saying, like, we're in a heap of trouble. We're in a heap of trouble for so many reasons. The climate's just one, with its COVID, the militarization. We know that war is not green. We know that, we have white supremacy on the rise, unfortunately. We have so many issues going on in this country. police killings, all these things, you know. And I'm just trying to find my notes here because I got distracted by the beautiful words that were being said. I'm not quite ready for the, here I go. Okay, just found it. All right, but we are in a heap of trouble, and trouble with the climate, militarization, war, white supremacy, fascism, civil rights are at risk, our human rights are at risk, housing rights, women's rights, voting rights, the COVID vaccine and testing, inequalities and disparities throughout the world. So we have to be diligent. We have to be courageous. We have to be in solidarity, in collaboration, and rise up because we are the human race. So let's unite to save our planet and our communities and life for many generations to come. So I want to thank everyone again, all the facilitators, Armando, Ruth, and Yusra. And thank you to all the speakers. Wow, what an amazing morning it's been. I've learned so much, and I'm hoping all of you have too. Jack just dropped an evaluation survey in the chat. So if you want to fill that out for us, that's great. We have several more virtual summit series coming up. Today's ecological protection was fabulous. We had 166 people that registered, and you know, almost exactly half showed up, you know, and there's like still 59 of you still here, so that's been great. And the next one we have is September 16th, climate and homefulness. On November 18th, climate and public health. In 2023, January 20th, climate and the economy. And we're going to end with, on St. Patrick's Day in 2023, March 17th, one of my favorite holidays, just happened to be a coincidence, but climate, equity, race, united actions. And I really appreciated Maya stating that, like, we all, how she feels like everyone here today has to come together to find more solutions, you know, because that's really where it's at. We have to, you know, I mean, I was an elected official. I'm currently not, but I'm still doing all the same work because I feel it's so important. Not getting paid, but it's so important. It's no time to quit. I kind of feel like we're back in the civil rights era. You know, I kind of feel like I can, I'm feeling that their urgency, you know, so it's so important right now to stay involved and stay engaged, to speak up for all the horrible, egregious things that are going on. Sadly, I just heard that Biden's talking about a two-state solution on his trip just now. No, we are one human race, humanity. We have to stand up for humanity. Anyone's fight is our fight too. So we all have to be united. We can't just, like, you know, it's just, the world is just in a crazy place right now. So we have to find hope, find joy where we can, and keep that smile on our face. Even though we have our mask, I'm double masking, but you know, we have to mask up, keep our distance, and be together, because I feel we don't know what's coming next. We know we have all these issues with the climate, war, racism. It's getting hecka crazy. And so just be prepared and keep your heart and mind open to change, and to say hello to strangers, and maybe help somebody out if you can, you know, volunteer. That's what I do all day long. So keep it up, the good work, everyone. And we're even ending early. It's such a fabulous morning. So we'll take the 10 minutes or 14 minutes that we have and just keep hope alive. And I'm praying for a better tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you September 16th. Register now. If you can make a small donation, any amount will be greatly appreciated. And keep up the good work. Keep smiling and keep those masks on and keep your distance. So have a blessed day, everyone. And thank you again for all the amazing speakers and everyone that behind the scenes that did all that they could to get this together. We meet weekly to plan all these things. So, and that's just one of the organizations that I'm involved with. So we all have our schedules, but we got to keep on keeping on because we got a lot of work to do. So thank you again, and have a blessed day. And I hope to see you September 16th at Climate and Homefulness. All right, y'all. Bye-bye.